People often say that blood and marriage are the only contracts that cannot be broken. The truth is, a wedding ring is sometimes just the perfect, legally binding contract for a predator to trap you and drain your life away. My son-in-law taught me that lesson. He taught it to me right before he tried to turn my only daughter into an empty, institutionalized shell. My name is Marcus. I am 60 years old. For 35 years, I worked as a structural engineer in Boston. I designed the steel skeletons of commercial skyscrapers. I spent my life calculating stress loads. I dealt with blueprints, reinforced steel, and cold, hard facts. I am a man of logic. I have to be. A single miscalculation can bring a 50-story building crashing down into dust. I retired 3 years ago. I wanted a quiet life. I lost my wife, Vivian, a decade ago to a brutal illness. Vivian was the foundation of our family. When she passed, she left behind a secret trust fund for our only daughter, Claire. Claire is 34 years old. She's a dedicated pediatric surgeon. She has a brilliant mind and a heart of pure gold. 3 years ago, she married Julian. Julian is 37. He is a venture capital director downtown. On paper, he is polished. He is successful. He is charming. His mother, Eleanor, is 65. She comes from old money in Weston, Massachusetts. They live in a sprawling, isolated estate. It feels more like a museum than a home. I never fit into their world of country clubs and tailored suits, but I tolerated their arrogance. Claire seemed happy. I taught her to see the good in people. But some people have absolutely no good in them at all. It started on a freezing Tuesday night. I was asleep. The sudden, sharp ringing of my cell phone woke me. It was exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. A phone call at that hour never brings good news. I answered immediately. "Dad," a voice whispered. It was Claire, but it did not sound like her. Her words were heavily slurred. They dragged together. She sounded like she was fighting just to keep her eyes open. "Claire, sweetheart, what is wrong?" I asked. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Dad, please come get me," she gasped. Her voice was laced with raw terror. "They won't let me." Before she could finish, I heard a muffled thud, a sharp gasp. The line went completely dead. I shouted her name. There was only silence. I did not call back. My engineering instincts kicked in. When a structural alarm sounds, you do not ask questions. You act. I threw off my blankets. I grabbed my heavy winter coat. I unlocked my bedside safe. I took out my legally registered Glock 19. I am not a violent man, but I am a fiercely protective father. I placed the weapon securely inside the glove box of my 2021 Ford F-150. I did not know what I was walking into. I just knew my daughter was in grave danger. The drive to Weston usually takes 45 minutes. I made it in 25. The roads were deserted. My tires gripped the frost-covered asphalt. My mind was racing. Claire is a surgeon. She does not drink heavily. She does not take illicit drugs. That slurred voice did not make logical sense. Find a comfortable seat. This story is going to take you very far. Hit the like button and let me know in the comments below where you are watching from. Trust me, you're going to like it here. At 2:45 in the morning, my headlights swept across the imposing iron gates of the Weston estate. The gates were left wide open. I drove my truck up the winding driveway. I slammed it in a park right in front of the massive double doors. The house was entirely dark. Only one dim light glowed on the second floor. Claire and Julian's master bedroom. I pounded my heavy fists against the solid oak door. I did not ring the bell. I hammered the wood with the force of a man ready to tear the house down brick by brick. The heavy door swung open. Standing there was Eleanor, Julian's mother. Any normal person woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning would be in pajamas. They would look disheveled. Not Eleanor. She wore a tailored silk robe. Her hair was perfectly styled. She wore a full face of premium makeup. She had not been sleeping. She had been awake. She was waiting. "Marcus, what on earth is the meaning of this disturbance?" she demanded. Her voice dripped with cold, calculated arrogance. "Where's my daughter?" I demanded. I stepped forward. Eleanor crossed her arms. She physically blocked the doorway. She stood her ground with a defiant smirk. "Claire is having a severe mental episode," she said smoothly. There was absolutely zero concern in her eyes. "She is completely hysterical." Julian gave her something to help her calm down. She is finally resting. You cannot disturb her. Go home, Marcus. You're making a fool of yourself. I stared at this wealthy, entitled woman. She was trying to dismiss me like hired help. The stench of her lie was suffocating. I did not ask for permission. I am an engineer. I understand mass and leverage. I stepped forward, using my broad shoulders to shove her firmly aside. She stumbled back against the foyer wall. She gasped in feigned outrage. You cannot barge into my home. She shrieked. Watch me, I growled. I took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time. I ignored her shrill protests. I reached the second-floor hallway. I headed straight for the master suite. The door was locked. I did not hesitate. I raised my heavy work boot. I kicked the door right below the brass handle. The expensive wood splintered. The lock gave way. The door flew open with a violent crash. I rushed into the room. My breath caught in my throat. The bedroom was a disaster. Designer lamps were overturned. Silk sheets were dragged onto the floor. And there, lying unconscious on the cold bathroom tile, was my daughter. I dropped to my knees beside her. Her clothes were disheveled. She was completely unresponsive. Her breathing was terribly shallow. But what made my blood run freezing cold were her arms. Under the harsh bathroom light, I saw dark, violent bruises. They were finger-shaped. They wrapped completely around her pale skin. Someone had pinned her down with terrifying force. As a man who understands structural stress, I knew immediately. These are not impact marks from a fall. These were targeted pressure points. These were the undeniable marks of a brutal physical struggle. Heavy, panicked footsteps rushed down the hallway. Julian lunged into the bedroom. He was panting heavily. His eyes darted frantically from the broken door to my face. He stood in the doorway wearing a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks. His clothes were completely unwrinkled. His hair was perfectly styled. He was not out of breath from panic. He was panting from physical exertion. My eyes locked onto his. In that split second, I saw a raw, unfiltered guilt. Then, he hurriedly plastered on a mask of shock. "Call an ambulance right now," I commanded. My voice shook the expensive artwork on the walls. Julian took a hesitant step forward. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Marcus, please calm down. We do not need emergency services. I am handling this. My mother already called a private transport. We are keeping this discreet. We cannot make a public spectacle." I stared at him. My daughter was lying unconscious on the marble floor. Her skin was turning an unnatural shade of pale. This polished coward was worried about a public spectacle. "She is barely breathing," I snarled. I stepped over the ruined wood of the doorframe. I closed the distance between us. "Call 911 or I will break your jaw." Julian held his ground. "You're not thinking clearly, Marcus. Claire is spiraling out of control." The pressure at the hospital broke her. She swallowed a handful of heavy sedatives tonight. She washed them down with a whole bottle of red wine. She tried to throw herself out the window. I had to tackle her. I had to pin her down by her arms to save her life. That is where those bruises came from. He delivered the lie with sickening precision. It was perfectly constructed, except for one fatal structural flaw. Claire is deathly allergic to sulfites. When she was 18, she took a single sip of red wine. Her throat closed completely. We had to rush her to the ER for an epinephrine injection. A whole bottle of red wine would trigger a fatal anaphylactic shock before the sedatives even reached her stomach. She had not touched wine in 16 years. Julian did not know this. He had built his lie on a rotting foundation. The wine, the pills, the suicide attempt. It was all a fabricated stage play. They had physically restrained her. They had forced those pills down her throat. Before I could tear him apart, the heavy sound of boots echoed on the stairs. 2 burly men in dark, unmarked uniforms walked in. They pushed a specialized transport gurney. They were not standard paramedics. They were private security contractors. "Take her," Julian ordered quickly. I stepped in front of my daughter. My fist clenched tight. Julian reached into his blazer. He pulled out a folded legal document. It bore an official blue notary seal. "Step aside, Marcus," Julian said. His voice turned as hard as concrete. "I am her legally wedded husband. I hold her comprehensive medical proxy. I alone make all critical healthcare decisions. I am transferring her to a private psychiatric facility in Vermont. You have absolutely no legal power to stop me. He shoved the paper into my chest. The signature was Claire's. I looked at Julian. I looked at Eleanor, smiling triumphantly in the hallway. I looked at the two massive security guards. If I threw a punch, I would be arrested for assault. I would be locked in a holding cell. Claire would be taken away, entirely isolated with these monsters. They wanted me to explode. They wanted to point at the violent, unstable father. I took a deep, agonizing breath. I forced my clenched hands to open. I slumped my shoulders. I let my chin fall toward my chest. I played the role of the defeated, broken old man. You are right, I whispered. I forced the words out. You are her husband. Let them take her. Julian smirked. The absolute arrogance radiated from his pores. They strapped my unconscious daughter to the gurney. They wheeled her out of the house. They loaded her into a phantom black van. The van drove away into the freezing night. I stood in the driveway. I did not scream. I did not throw a punch. I said nothing that night. Quietly, methodically. Let me explain why. Hashtag Act 3. The silence, gray rock. I drove back to Boston. The winter air was bitter and freezing. My F-150 hummed steadily down the empty turnpike. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel. I was not panicking. Panic is a completely useless emotion. Panic causes structural failure. When a load-bearing wall begins to crack, you do not scream at the concrete. You secure the perimeter. You analyze the fault lines. You prepare for controlled demolition. I arrived at my empty, suburban home. The silence inside was heavy. I took off my winter coat. I did not turn on the main lights. I walked directly into my private study. I looked at my desk. A small red light was blinking on my secure digital answering machine. I pressed play. The room filled with static. Then I heard Claire's voice. She did not sound slurred. She sounded sharp. She sounded terrified. She was whispering frantically. Dad, please pick up. It's Claire. She took a ragged breath. Julian is completely bankrupt. I found his hidden ledgers in his briefcase. He has been running a massive Ponzi scheme for 3 years. He embezzled millions from his clients. The federal auditors are coming on Monday. My blood turned to absolute ice. Mom's trust fund, Claire whispered, her voice shaking. The $12 million. It matured yesterday on my 34th birthday. Julian is demanding I transfer the entire balance to his offshore shell companies. He says it is a temporary loan to hide the deficit. I told him absolutely not. I told him I'm calling Harrison to file for divorce. There was a sudden, violent scuffle on the audio. The sound of a glass shattering against hardwood. You're not going anywhere, Julian's voice echoed in the background. It was a dark, lethal hiss. You're going to sign those authorization forms, or I will make sure you never leave this house. Claire gasped. Dad, he locked the door. He is. The audio violently cut off. A dead dial tone filled the room. I stood perfectly still in the dark. The puzzle pieces locked firmly into place. The structural blueprint of their deception was entirely visible. Claire had refused a hand over her $12 million inheritance. She had threatened to expose his federal crimes. Julian was backed into a corner. He was facing federal prison. So he and his mother pivoted to a horrific contingency plan. They cannot forge her signature. But if Claire was declared mentally incompetent, Julian could use his spousal medical proxy. He could file for a hostile financial conservatorship. He would gain absolute legal control over her entire estate. He could drain the $12 million, pay off his creditors, and cover up his massive fraud. To do that, they needed a psychiatric crisis. They poisoned my daughter. They pinned her down. They forced sedatives down her throat. They shipped her off to a private medical black site in Vermont. They were going to keep her sedated until a judge signed her life away. I sat down in my leather chair. I felt absolutely no sorrow. I felt no urge to weep. I felt a cold, mechanical fury. It was heavier than poured concrete. Julian and Eleanor thought they had safely disposed of an ignorant, grieving old man. They thought I was a defeated victim. They were dead wrong. I am a builder, but I also know exactly how to tear things down. Act 4. Investigation. The blueprint of collapse. I needed a demolition crew. I picked up my phone and made 2 calls. First, I called Silas. Silas is a retired corporate espionage investigator. He spent 30 years digging up dirt hidden beneath corporate shell companies. Second, I called Harrison. Harrison is a corporate attorney. He is a shark in a $4,000 tailored suit. He negotiates massive corporate buyouts. He operates like a machine designed to grind contracts into dust. We met at an abandoned industrial warehouse on the edge of the city. It was off the grid. The air smelled of stale coffee and ozone. I laid out the entire situation. The forged suicide, the $12 million trust, the private psychiatric facility in Vermont. We have a massive legal roadblock, Harrison stated. He adjusted his glasses. Julian holds the medical proxy. The law protects him perfectly. If we force a wellness check, his lawyers will slap you with a restraining order. We need undeniable, physical proof of his financial crimes to freeze the trust. And we need to know exactly what they pumped into her veins, Silas added, before the corrupt doctors flush her system. I nodded. I will get the financial data. Silas, you get the blood. But first, I needed to lower Julian's defenses. I had to make him feel completely invincible. Arrogance is a massive structural blind spot. The Dunning-Kruger effect makes fools believe they are untouchable. I pulled out a cheap burner phone. I dialed Julian's number. I cleared my throat. I forced my voice to drop. I sounded frail. I sounded utterly broken. Julian, I rasped. I let a heavy sigh escape my lips. Marcus, Julian replied. His voice dripped with fake, soothing warmth. How are you holding up? I'm not doing well, I whispered. I cannot stay in this house. The memories are killing me. I'm packing my truck. I am driving up to my old cabin in Maine. I need to be off the grid. I just want to grieve in peace for a few weeks. Julian could not hide his profound relief. He sounded like a man who had just won the lottery. That is a brilliant idea. Marcus, Julian cooed. You need to rest. Do not worry about Claire. I will handle the doctors. Just go to Maine. Disconnect from everything. He ended the call. He thought he had won. He thought the annoying father-in-law was running away to cry in the woods. Let that sink in. He had no idea he had just invited a master engineer into his walls. That evening, Julian and Eleanor attended a high-profile charity gala in downtown Boston. They were smiling for the cameras. They were playing the tragic, supportive family. I dressed in dark tactical clothing. I grabbed a black canvas duffel bag. I drove to their Weston estate. I bypassed the iron gates entirely. I knew this property. 3 years ago, I had personally reviewed the architectural permits for their renovation. I knew exactly where the security junction boxes were hidden. I moved through the freezing tree line. I located the utility panel. I used insulated wire cutters. I severed the primary fiber optic line. The system tried to roll over to a cellular backup. I pulled a localized signal jammer from my pocket. I flipped the switch. The digital keypad on the back door flashed red. Then it died completely. The house was entirely blind and deaf. I used a tactical crowbar. I applied precise upward pressure. The deadbolt snapped open. I stepped into the dark kitchen. I moved silently. I did not use a flashlight. I relied on the ambient moonlight. I walked directly into Julian's mahogany-paneled home office. This was the belly of the beast. I climbed onto his desk. I unscrewed the metal grating of the HVAC vent near the ceiling. I planted a high-definition micro camera inside the ductwork. It had infrared night vision. It possessed a massive battery reserve. I angled the lens to capture the entire room. Next, I bypassed his locked computer. I plugged an industrial USB cloning drive directly into the motherboard port. A small blue light pulsed in the dark. I stood in the silence. I watched the progress bar crawl. 10%, 50%, 90%. The drive word. It finished. I ripped the USB out. I had just stolen his entire financial existence. Every offshore routing number. Every hidden ledger. I slipped out of the house, leaving absolutely zero trace. While I was extracting the data, Silas was driving through the snowy mountains of Vermont. He parked near the Silver Pines psychiatric facility. It was heavily guarded, but Silas did not attack the front gate. He targeted a foundational weakness. He intercepted a night shift nurse named Brenda in a commuter parking lot. Brenda was drowning in medical debt. Silas handed her a thick brown envelope. Inside was $10,000 in crisp, unmarked $100 bills. Brenda smuggled a clean, uncompromised vial of Claire's blood out of the lockdown ward. She bypassed the corrupt facility administrators entirely. By 3 a.m., we were back in the warehouse. Harrison handed the blood sample to an independent forensic toxicologist he kept on permanent retainer. We paid an exorbitant premium for immediate results. The results were catastrophic. The emergency room report filed by Julian is a complete fabrication, Harrison stated. His voice echoed in the cold warehouse. Julian claimed Claire overdosed on red wine and generic Xanax. But this independent sweep just isolated the actual chemical compound in her bloodstream. Harrison placed the lab report on the metal table. It is flunitrazepam, a highly potent, heavily restricted central nervous system depressant. It is a chemical restraint used strictly in severe psychiatric wards. I stared at the black ink on the page. Julian and Eleanor did not just sedate her. They utilized a military-grade chemical weapon to erase her mind. They had officially crossed the line from corporate fraud to attempted homicide. Then, Silas decrypted the stolen USB drive. He found a hidden directory of voice-activated dictation memos. Julian's computer had automatically recorded background audio in his office. Silas played the most recent file. The warehouse filled with the crisp, undeniable sound of Eleanor's voice. You have to be firm with feral things. Julian, Eleanor's recorded voice sneered. You have to break their spirit. I held her perfectly still. I dug my fingers into her arms until she could not move. I held her wrists while you forced that mixture down her throat. Julian's voice echoed next, smug and victorious. Once the judge signs the conservatorship on Friday, we pull the plug on her trust. The clinic keeps her a vegetable for the next 10 years. No one will ever believe a junkie. I stood perfectly still. My hands rested on the metal table. The structural blueprints of their criminal empire were completely exposed. We had the financial ledgers. We had the toxicology report. We had the audio confession. They thought they were building a flawless legal fortress. They were actually digging their own federal grave. It was Thursday morning. Julian officially filed the ex parte conservatorship. He requested an emergency, closed-door hearing for Friday at 9 a.m. He moved with absolute, reckless speed. He believed his flank was completely unprotected. He thought I was sitting in a freezing cabin in Maine, weeping over my broken daughter. He suffered from a massive structural blind spot. Arrogance always builds the weakest foundations. While Julian prepared his fake tears for the judge, I went to work in the shadows. I did not just want to block his legal maneuver. I wanted to completely annihilate his reality. I sat in Harrison's downtown law office. I authorized the liquidation of my personal retirement portfolio. I had spent 35 years building commercial skyscrapers. My personal wealth was significantly larger than Claire's trust fund. I had $18 million in liquid capital. I instructed Harrison to construct 3 anonymous Delaware shell companies. We moved with absolute, terrifying efficiency. Julian's investment firm was bleeding out. His creditors were panicking. Through Harrison's legal network, my shell companies aggressively purchased Julian's massive, toxic debt for pennies on the dollar. I did not stop there. Eleanor's sprawling Weston estate was heavily mortgaged. She had not made a payment in 7 months. I bought the mortgage. The Silver Pines psychiatric facility in Vermont. It was privately owned by a corporate umbrella. I bought their commercial property deed. In less than 24 hours, I became their supreme creditor. I owned the roof over their heads. I owned the floors beneath their expensive Italian shoes. I owned the very walls of the medical prison where they were keeping my daughter. They were completely bankrupt, but they did not know it yet. They thought they were the architects of a brilliant scam. They were actually just rats running inside a maze that I had personally designed. Let that sink in. Thursday evening, Eleanor pushed her arrogance to the absolute limit. She posted a video on her elite social media channels. She sat in her opulent parlor. She squeezed out perfectly timed artificial tears. She claimed her daughter-in-law was suffering from severe addiction. She claimed I was a deadbeat, mentally unstable father who had completely abandoned his sick child. She asked for prayers and privacy. She wanted public sympathy. She wanted to control the narrative. I watched the video on my phone. I felt absolutely no anger. Disgust is a useless emotion. I just watched her dig her own federal grave. The trap was fully constructed. The explosives were wired. The perimeter was secured. There was nothing left to do but wait for dawn. Friday morning, 9 a.m., the county courthouse, private judicial chamber, room 402. The heavy oak doors muffled the noise of the city outside. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with manufactured grief. Judge Thomas sat high behind the polished mahogany bench. At the plaintiff table, Julian and Eleanor were delivering the performance of a lifetime. Julian's shoulders were slumped. He clutched a crumpled white tissue. He dabbed at his dry eyes. Eleanor sat beside him. She rubbed his back. She played the stoic, supportive mother perfectly. "Your Honor," Julian whimpered. His voice cracked with rehearsed devastation. "It breaks my heart. I love Claire, but the drugs have destroyed her mind." She drank a bottle of wine and swallowed a handful of sedatives. I had to physically restrain her from jumping out a window. She needs long-term psychiatric lockdown. She needs to be protected from her own financial trust fund. Judge Thomas reviewed the forged medical binder. He looked sympathetic. He picked up his heavy black pen. One signature. That was all it took to erase my daughter's freedom. I did not let the pen touch the paper. The massive brass handles of the courtroom doors turned. The heavy oak panels swung violently inward. The thud echoed like a gunshot. I stepped across the threshold. I wore my tailored charcoal suit. My posture was perfectly rigid. My face was carved from freezing stone. The heavy thud of my leather boots struck the marble floor. I did not walk alone. Harrison marched on my right. He carried a heavy leather briefcase. Silas flanked my left. And directly behind us, moving in synchronized silence, were two broad-shouldered FBI agents. Supervisory Special Agent Vance led them. The silence dropped into the room like wet concrete. Julian froze. The crumpled tissue fell from his hands. His fake tears vanished instantly. Pure, unadulterated terror washed over his face. He recognized the federal badges. His financial sanctuary had been breached. Eleanor's aristocratic mask shattered. She shot to her feet. The wooden chair scraped harshly. What is the meaning of this? Eleanor screeched. Her voice echoed wildly. She pointed a trembling finger at my chest. "Your Honor, remove this man. He is unstable. He is violently interrupting a sealed medical proceeding." "Order!" Judge Thomas roared. He slammed his gavel. He glared down at me. "Sir, this is a closed hearing." "Who are you?" I did not yell. I walked forward. A cold, terrifying certainty guided my steps. I stopped 3 feet away from Julian. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was smooth. It cut the air like a scalpel. "My name is Marcus. I am the father of the woman they are trying to imprison. I am not here to disrupt a medical proceeding. I am here to report a premeditated kidnapping, a chemical poisoning, and a $12 million federal wire fraud." The silence was absolute. Julian looked like the floor had vanished beneath him. He opened his mouth. Only a dry wheeze came out. Harrison stepped forward. He clicked his briefcase open. "Your Honor, I am Harrison Vance, corporate attorney," Harrison stated. "We have an independent forensic toxicology report. We legally procured a clean blood sample from Claire yesterday." Harrison handed the sealed file to the bailiff. "The emergency room report submitted by Mr. Julian is a complete fabrication. Claire did not overdose on Xanax and wine. The independent sweep isolated the actual compound. It is flunitrazepam, a highly restricted central nervous system depressant. Furthermore, Claire has a documented fatal allergy to sulfites. 1 glass of wine would kill her instantly." Judge Thomas scanned the lab results. His face hardened. He glared at Julian. "Mr. Julian," the judge demanded. His voice cracked like a whip. "Are you aware that falsifying medical records constitutes severe felony fraud?" Julian stammered. His polished persona was dead. "Your Honor, I didn't know. The doctors told me." "That is a lie," I stated. I stepped up to the wooden railing. I pulled out my burner phone. I plugged an auxiliary cable directly into the court speaker system. Your Honor, they did not just forge documents. They violently poisoned my daughter in her own home. I have the recording to prove it. Eleanor lunged forward. Objection. He is fabricating evidence. You cannot play that. Sit down, Mrs. Eleanor. The judge roared. Play the audio, Mr. Marcus. I hit play. The harsh static hissed. Then, Eleanor's recorded voice filled the chamber. It was cruel. It was merciless. You have to be firm with feral things. Julian, you have to break their spirit. I held her perfectly still. I dug my fingers in her arms. I held her wrists while you forced that mixture down her throat. Julian's recorded voice chimed in next. Once the judge signs the conservatorship, we pull the plug on her trust. The clinic keeps her a vegetable for the next 10 years. No one will ever believe a junkie. I unplugged the cable. Eleanor collapsed heavily into her chair. She gasped for air. Julian's face was completely drained of blood. He looked like a man standing on the gallows. Judge Thomas sat perfectly still. In 30 years, I have never witnessed such profound malice, the judge stated softly. The emergency proxy is revoked. Full guardianship is granted to Marcus. Bring your daughter home. Special Agent Vance stepped forward. The metallic click of silver handcuffs echoed loudly in the room. Julian, Vance stated, his federal authority was unyielding. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and attempted murder. Julian's knees buckled. The FBI agent hauled him up by his expensive collar. The arrogant predator was gone. He was a pathetic, weeping coward. Wait, Julian shrieked. He twisted his body. He pointed his cuffed hands at his own mother. It was her. She orchestrated the entire thing. She pinned Claire down. She made me do it. Eleanor completely snapped. Her refined elegance vaporized. You worthless little worm. Eleanor screamed. She lunged across the table. She slapped Julian viciously across the face. The crack echoed like a gunshot. I spent my life cleaning up your messes. You ruined us. The bailiffs tackled Eleanor to the marble floor. They pinned her arms behind her back. She thrashed and kicked. Her designer dress was ruined. The physical struggle was over. The complete destruction of their lives was finalized. As the federal agents dragged Julian toward the heavy oak doors, he desperately dug his heels into the marble. He looked back at me. His face was a mask of hollow, sickening desperation. Marcus, please. Julian sobbed. He begged me. They're going to seize everything. The bank is foreclosing on the Weston estate today at noon. You are a millionaire. You can pay off the mortgage. Please, don't let me be homeless when I get out. Save the estate. He was still trying to manipulate me. He still thought family loyalty was a one-way street. I did not break my silence immediately. I simply reached into my inner jacket pocket. I pulled out a heavy stack of legal documents. They were printed on thick stock paper with raised corporate seals. I dropped the commercial deeds directly onto the plaintiff table. I looked down at the weeping man. My voice was perfectly smooth. It was completely devoid of mercy. The bank is not foreclosing on you, Julian. I said, I bought your debt. I bought your mortgage. I own the Weston estate. You are officially evicted. Pack your things.